Okay. All right. So hopefully you guys remember from last week. We're still in our discussion of monopolistic competition, and we discussed the characteristics of a monopoly. So what do you guys remember about what are some of the primary characteristics of a monopoly?
That they're price makers.
Good. And what do you mean by that? How is it different than perfect competition?
Perfect competition, they're price takers, meaning that they have to follow the price they're given,
Mm-hmm.
and then monopoly, they're price makers, so they create the price they want to sell the good for.
Good. Yeah. So they can set the price that they wishes, which is different than perfect competition, where they just had to sort of accept the market price, where the intersection, the market equilibrium price was, and that is what they had to accept at their own price, right? Which is not the case for a monopoly. And what about the demand? What did we say the demand curve for a monopoly looks like? So let me take you back to this slide. Does everybody remember this? So, of course, as you can notice, right, it looks very different. That the monopolist demand looks very different than the perfectly competitive farms demand curve. We saw that the perfectly competitive farms faced a perfectly elastic or horizontal demand, right? Which means that at this price they can sell as much as they want and they don't have to change their price, right? At one price they can sell as much as they want. Whereas with the monopolist, right, you see that they face a downward sloping demand curve, which should tell you from the law of demand that if they wanted to sell, increase their quantity, they would have no other option but to lower their price. And as we will see today, that has important consequences or implications for their marginal revenue. Okay. And so just to reiterate, with the monopoly, they are the single producer of a service or a product, right? There is no competition. They're producing something that is unique and original and that nobody else has a substitute for, right? And there is also you know huge significant barriers to entry in a monopolist market, right? So which sort of you know makes it really hard for competitions to enter. There can be legal barriers, in the forms of patents or copyrights. There can be economic barriers when you have economies of scale or a natural monopoly where it is just more easier, least costly to have one sort of farm service the entire demand for a market. Okay. So the other important thing, right, as you remember from the perfect competition, right, we had two different things. We had a market and then we had a farm. We had a big queue and we had a small queue. So that is never, we don't have to do that anymore, like a side by side with market and farm anymore, right? Because why? With the monopoly, why is this queue the same as this queue? Why is that?
There's no perfect competition.
Of course, yeah, that's true. But why is it that in monopoly that is the case?
Because you're talking about one firm.
Exactly. So one farm is the entire market, right? The farm and the market, they're synonymous here. They whatever demand there is for this product, this entire farm is gonna have to, service that entire demand. And so they face the market demand curve, which is the downward sloping demand curve. Okay. Okay, let's start with the marginal revenue discussion here on this table. Okay. As you see, so imagine we are talking about a monopolist here, and we have this right here. The first two columns, is the relationship between price and showing the relationship between price and quantity demanded, right? So as you see, at a price of 7, zero quantity is demanded, and as you go down, yeah.
Always in monopoly, the quantity will be
the opposite as price, like 7. If price is 7, quantity is 0, and if
So
price is 0.
by opposite, do you mean like, if price goes down, quantity demand? I'm sorry, if price goes
Yes.
up. Yes, of course. That is the principle. If you face a downward sloping demand, that is the law, right? That is the law of demand that tells you, and we understand that intuitively too, right? And if price goes up for something, we want less. So because a monopoly faces
That's
that,
always in monopoly or in everything.
so is that the case in perfect competition?
No, my question is, if that price goes up, quantity goes down. Whenever we're talking about economics or just in monopoly.
So in economics, right, we are talking about different types of markets, right? So the first one we started with was pure competition or perfect competition. That was different, right? This rule, this law of demand or downward sloping demand curve didn't apply there, right? So we saw that they had something different. But in the other types of market that we will talk about, monopolistic competition and monopoly, we will see that they face this kind of downward sloping demand curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is going to be the case with a monopoly. So with a competitive farm, right, the farm's demand was such that they can sell as much as there is infinite demand at this one price, right? They can sell as much as they want at this one price, but that is not the case for a monopoly because they face a downward sloping demand curve. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good question. So as you see, this principle applies here, as price is going down, as price is going down, quantity demanded is increasing. So we see that follows the law of demand. And the next column, then shows the total revenue associated, with each of these different prices and quantities, right? We know that total revenue is just, price times quantity. So 7 times 0 gives you 0, 6 times 1 gives you 6, and on and on until all the way down. And then we have this other column, which is for the marginal revenue. And what is the formula for marginal revenue? Or what do you understand when I say marginal revenue?
The change in revenue.
Okay, from what?
What do you mean from what?
It's a change in revenue. There are two different components, right? You cannot just say is the change in total revenue from change in quantity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you have to, if you tell someone and if they ask you about marginal revenue and you give them, it's a change in total revenue with respect to change in quantity. Okay. So if you just told them change in revenue, they wouldn't accept that as a definition, or, like they'd say like there is a gap in understanding somewhere. So it's of course the change in total revenue when you change quantity, right? So if I sell one more, how much does my total revenue change by? Okay, so here we see that marginal revenue for the first unit is this difference between 6 minus 0, and the quantity, the change in quantity is of course just 1. So for the first one it's 6 minus 0 divided by 1, or 6. And then for the next one it's 10 minus 6 divided by the change in quantity, which is 1 in everywhere, right? So marginal revenue, what do you notice about marginal revenue, or the numbers for marginal revenue? What do you notice about them?
That they're decreasing.
Good, yes. So they start at some positive number, and then they start decreasing. It goes down to 0, and then it starts becoming negative. And there are also some other interesting things that hopefully, let's talk about them, and I guess in the next slide as we show. But what I kind of want to bring your attention to here is that it's as you see, right, with perfect competition, demand, right, with perfect competition, let's write here competition. demand was the same, was marginal revenue, and it was also the equal to price. But we see that that is not the case here, right? Marginal revenue is something entirely different when it comes to the monopoly, right? The marginal revenue for the first unit, right, it's 6. The price is 6, right? So with the first unit, it's sort of, it's the same. But everywhere else, you will see that, for the second unit, the price is 5, but the marginal revenue is 4. The third unit, the price is 4, but the marginal revenue is 2. So as we will see, and I will tell you why it's the case, with the monopolist, this is not going to hold. This situation with perfect competition, this is not true anymore. And with the monopoly, we will see that the marginal revenue is going to be less than the price. Okay, so let's see why that is the case. Okay. So as we understand, right, so there are two different things that happen, right, when you think about total revenue. Okay, total revenue is calculated by price times quantity. Okay, so let's say if we look at this graph over here, okay, and we see that for a monopolist, because they face a downward sloping demand curve, it has to be the case that, if they sell at the price of 6, right, the quantity demanded is 1. At the price of 5, the quantity demanded is 2, right? So my total revenue, right, from the first unit, right, if I sell 1, my total revenue would be what? How much would my total... Sorry? You can kind of see it from here, right? So the price, if the price is 6, right, it's just price times quantity. So it's 6 times the quantity demanded, right? So if I were to sell the first unit, my total revenue would be all of this box, right?
It's 1. It's 6.
It's 6, right? So for the first unit that I sell, it's 6. And then because I want to increase, I want to sell 1 more, what do I have to do? I have to lower my price, right? And as you see, right, yes, so my total revenue from selling 2 is 10, and that has to happen because it's not like I can sort of discriminate between these two people. Okay, let's say it's not the case that I can charge or I can sell the first one for $6 and the next one for $5. If I want to sell 2, I have to sell both of them for $5. Okay, so there are two different things that happen here, right? When you sold that first, so let's see, I'm gonna do this. When you sold that first quantity, right, the total revenue was all of that orange box, okay? And then when you sell the next unit, right, so you are selling 2, and then the total revenue would be this box once again, right, this entire box. Okay, so this box, right, this is staying, right, but then you lost out on this box when you sold this additional unit. However, you gained this much more, right, by selling the next unit. You lost some because of your lowered price, but you also gained some from increasing your quantity. So the total revenue, which is price times quantity, and we also know that marginal revenue comes from the change in total revenue. So let's find marginal revenue, or which is just the change in total revenue divided by change in quantity, which is what? So 10 minus 6 divided by quantity, change in quantity, which is 2 minus 1, which is 4, right? So my marginal revenue from the second unit, right? So this is for the second unit. So my marginal revenue from the second unit is 4. And as you see, the price of the second unit is 5. And this is, it is all just to demonstrate here that, this happens because there are two different things. There are two different things that affect your total revenue, which is price and quantity. So if you lower price, you sell a little bit more, but you lost out on some revenue from lowering your price, but you gain a little bit more by increasing your quantity. Okay, but all this is to make the point that in monopoly, your marginal revenue is no longer equal to your price, right? So this is your marginal revenue. Your marginal revenue is going to be less than your price. Okay, and this is what I notice everywhere if I look at this table. So for every level of price associated with each level of quantity, this is the case that marginal revenue is always going to be less than your price. Okay, and by how much, that is also an interesting point. So as you see here, price dropped, right? When I lowered my price, it dropped by $1, right? But then how much did my marginal revenue drop? My marginal revenue, right, going from 6 to 5, right? So price dropped by $1. My marginal revenue changed by how much? So look at this table over here, guys. So this is what I'm looking at, my quantity, like going from 1 to 2, right? At the price of $6, right, my quantity was 1, and at the price of $5, my quantity is 2, right? So in order to sell, one more, I had to lower my price by $1. But look at how much my marginal revenue went down by. It went down by $2, right? Is that not true?
Yes.
Yes. So this is going to be the case everywhere. Everywhere price, you have to lower your price by $1. Marginal revenue is going to go down by 2. Okay, so it's 4 minus 2, 2, 2 minus 0, 2, 0 minus 2, so that's negative 2. But the point is that here, this information is going to be useful when you have to draw the demand curve and also the marginal revenue curve. Okay, so for a monopoly, let's try to draw this. Okay, let's try to draw what the monopolists' demand curve and marginal revenue, like all of that looks like. Okay, so let me erase this page. So this is me drawing the monopolists' monopoly graph. Okay, so I'm just gonna get information from this table over here. Okay, so price goes from 7 to 0, quantity is 0 to 7. Okay, so I'm just gonna draw them right here. So okay, so at the price of 7, 0 quantity is demanded, and I also know that at the price of 0, the quantity demanded is 7. So I can just connect these 2 points, and that gives me my demand curve. Okay, so this is the demand curve for the monopoly, and then in between, it's like at the price of 6, the quantity demanded is 1, the price of 5, and it's 2. So you can draw them in if you like. And now to show the marginal revenue, we know that the marginal revenue starts, at the quantity of 1, right? For the first unit, the marginal revenue is 6, and then 4, 2, 0, on and on. So it starts somewhere here, right? Oh, that's very crooked. So something like this, and then it crosses the horizontal axis between 3 and 4, and then it starts, it just becomes negative, more and more negative, right? So that's your marginal revenue curve. 6. Okay, sorry, I might have done this a little bit. All right. So in some books, you will see these two lines, like the marginal revenue, like starting all the way from like where your demand curve starts. In some books, you'll see them, starting, where, at the quantity of 1, not at 0 over here. So I don't really think it matters. But for, if it helps you, you can start them at the same point, and then just draw them down, as long as you sort of make sure that your marginal revenue curve intersects the quantity axis, the horizontal axis, in the point like halfway. Like, so it's from 0 to 7, I made it cross, it bisected or intersected the horizontal axis at 3.5, which is halfway between 0 and 7, right? So that is all because, of what we saw, okay, that the marginal revenue, right, it is dropping by twice as much as price is dropping. When price drops by $1, everywhere marginal revenue is dropping by $2. So marginal revenue will always have, let's see, I'm going to write it here. Marginal revenue will always have twice the slope of demand. Okay, so it will be more steep, right? The demand curve is more flatter. The marginal revenue curve will be more steep, and it will be twice as steep. Okay, so it will have twice the slope of the demand curve. So as long as you remember that, you should be fine. Any questions here? So, I was just trying to draw out, I just took the numbers from the table and, just draw out your demand curve and then the marginal revenue. But do you have anything that you are not understanding here?
No, it's okay.
Okay, great. Then let's move on to this topic of elasticity. Like, we have to talk about this a little bit, right? So remember how we talked about elasticity and how that is sort of the change in, anybody remembers what elasticity was? Like price elasticity of demand. What was the formula? It's the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So here we're bringing this back here in monopoly again, because this it's sort of important with monopoly. Like they determine it helps you determine where the monopolist is going to produce. So I want you to take a look at this graph with me here. So don't worry about the total revenue curve yet, but remember how when we first learned about elasticity, we said that even along a straight line demand curve, right, there are three different ranges of elasticity, right? We said that in the midpoint, right, the midpoint is where it is unit elastic, right? Where the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price, is just equal to 1. Okay. And then in the top portion of the demand curve, right, from all the way up at the vertical axis until the midpoint, this is where the price elasticity of demand, this is where the demand curve is elastic. Okay, so you have elasticity which is greater than 1. And then from the midpoint all the way until you meet the horizontal axis, this is where the elasticity of demand is inelastic, right? Or it's the number comes down to being less than 1. Okay, this is sort of bringing back some memory, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If not, I'm gonna have to encourage you to go back to watch the videos from our discussion on elasticity. We talked about this in a lot of detail there. Okay, so all of this is to make the point that hopefully you remember that elasticity and revenue, right, these two ideas sort of go hand in hand. And we demonstrated this with this total revenue graph, which looks like this. If we were to put the two graphs together on one graph, this is what it would look like. Okay, so here let's see what we can find out from here. So where is your total revenue maximized? If you were to think about it, like thinking about the regions of elasticity, where does it look like your total revenue is maximized, or the maximum as it possibly can be? So isn't it the case that your total revenue is maximized when your demand,
when your marginal revenue and marginal costs are equal?
not marginal cost we haven't brought in yet, so let's not worry about that right now. But yes, so an important point here is that, so from what we understand or what we see in this graph is that total revenue, so the maximum of total revenue is over here, right? It happens right here at this point, right, where it is unit elastic. Okay, that your elasticity is equal to 1. Okay, and it also corresponds with your marginal revenue curve, which is what is happening to your marginal revenue at that point right here. Isn't it becoming 0?
Mm-hmm.
So total revenue is maximized when marginal revenue is equal to 0. So this is, if you had taken some calculus, this would be like so much more intuitive. Like this, you can easily explain this, with the slope and the first derivative. But since I'm going to assume that a lot of you haven't, so let's just stick with me telling you the information that total revenue, and you can also see it from this graph, that total revenue is maximized when marginal revenue is 0. Okay, and also hopefully you can see here that marginal revenue is positive, right? It becomes 0 like over here, right? But it is positive in the region where the demand curve is elastic, right? In the range of the demand curve where the demand is elastic, right? Hopefully you can see that this is where your marginal revenue is positive. Okay, because if you produce anywhere beyond beyond this 3.5, your marginal revenue is starting to become negative. And so the main point, like the most important takeaway from here is that a monopolist will always produce in the region of the demand curve where it is elastic. Okay, so they will always choose a quantity in the elastic portion of their demand curve. So they'll never produce somewhere like down below. They'll always produce in the elastic portion of their demand curve, because this is where your marginal revenue is positive. It makes no sense to produce somewhere like more quantity where your marginal revenue is starting to become negative and you're actually making, you're actually like sort of losing money by producing more, right? So monopolist will choose quantity in the elastic portion of demand curve. Okay, so which is all of this. So this is, we will see that the monopolists will always choose their quantity, and it will always going to be in like the top half. Okay. Any question?
No.
Moe, Gabriel?
No, I'm good.
Good. Max? Everybody feeling good?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, now let's talk about profit maximization. So we know that, so that is the case with, every single like type of market or firm out there, right? Their main goal, right, is to maximize profit. It's not to maximize revenue or, to minimize cost. It is to maximize profit, which is total revenue minus total cost. So they want to maximize this difference, right? They want total revenue to be as big as possible, but then also total cost to be as low as possible, right? So they want to maximize the difference between these two. Okay. And then you should also remember that the profit maximizing rule, right? Okay, about how much quantity to produce, it's going to be the same for all farms no matter what. So if you want to maximize profit, right, you should choose quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Okay, that is the profit maximizing rule of how much to produce. So this is the case for everybody. So where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, this is where you choose your quantity. So let me draw it over here again. So quantity, price, if this is your demand, okay, make sure you draw your marginal revenue so that it's like halfway. It's going to cross it halfway. So this is your marginal revenue, and make sure that that you're not stopping it there, because it does become negative. So you take it a little bit farther down to show that that it becomes negative. Okay. And then I'm going to bring in my marginal cost curve, which looks the same as we know it, right? So it looks like this. So at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, this is how much the monopoly is going to produce. So I'm going to write it down as QM. Okay. But for a monopoly, right, the price that they charge is not going to be where MC equals MR, right? So for perfect competition, we saw that P was equal to MR, which was also equal to demand. So they were all equal. So where we also, that was also the reason why price was also equal to marginal cost, because marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost and P is equal to MR. So therefore that makes price is equal to marginal cost in perfect competition. But with a monopoly, the price that they're going to charge is going to be taking this quantity. They take this quantity and then they go all the way up to the demand curve, because this is the willingness to pay for this quantity QM. So for the monopolist, the demand curve tells you about the willingness to pay, right? So they know that the willingness to pay for QM is, I'm going to find that by going all the way up to my demand curve, and then they take it to the vertical axis, and that is the level of their price. Okay, so you find, first thing, you draw your demand curve, then you draw your marginal revenue curve, then you bring in the marginal cost, find the quantity, profit maximizing quantity from the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost. So that's your QM. And then you take from your QM, like from the quantity that you, from the profit maximizing quantity, you just take it all the way up to your demand curve. And where it hits your demand curve, that's going to be the level of price that you're going to charge for this quantity. Okay? And then, you can bring in your average total cost curve, to show what the profit would look like for a monopoly. Okay? So let's see. Okay, so the average total cost of producing QM is going to be this much, right? So this is my average total cost of producing QM. So this right here, all of this is going to be my profit, economic profit, which is greater than 0 because my price is greater than my average total cost at QM. So from knowing what we know about barriers, what do you think is going to happen to the monopolist's profit, right? So we know that they're making profit in the short run. Do you think they can hold on to that in the long run?
Yes.
Okay, why do you say that?
That the profit will be constant.
Sorry?
Are you asking if the profit will be constant in the long run?
I'm not saying if it's constant, but let's think about, look back to perfect competition, right? We saw that, it was possible for firms to make economic profits in the short run, right? But we also saw that they weren't able to hold on to that profit because why?
People left the firms and then the price goes up. People left the market, sorry. Like the first left the market.
Okay, so that's so that's with losses, right? People left the market when they saw losses. So let's say we're talking about profit, with economic profit, what happened in perfect competition when there was profit? Max?
The firms enter the market.
Okay, great. So what happens then? What happens to the profit for the firms that,
Profit, then there is no profit.
Profit starts going down as more farms come in, right? And we saw that, went down, the price went down all the way until it was at the minimum of average total cost, which meant that there was 0 economic profit for the existing farms, right? So that all of that happened with perfect competition because there were no barriers to entry. Remember, that was one of the distinguishing characteristics of perfect competition. There were no barriers to entry. It is relatively really easy to come in and go out. Whereas with monopoly, there are huge significant barriers to entry in this kind of market. So for a monopoly, right, they're going to be able to hold on to this profit because it is very unlikely that anybody is going to be able to come in and take away their market share. Okay, so they're going to be able to hold on to this profit even in the long run. Okay. How does everybody feel about being able to draw this graph?
I think it's difficult because we need to memorize all of the letters and where each one goes.
Okay, but do you think it is at least, if you remember stuff from perfect
practice, I think we can get it.
Okay, yeah. So of course, that is always going to be the key because so many of them look so similar, but then there are little differences. So you're gonna have to sort of like memorize these little differences, and it's all about practicing, really, like you mentioned. So as long as you practice and you know what the demand curve looks like, what the marginal revenue looks like for a monopoly, what the marginal cost looks like, and then where you get the price, the price is not at this level, but you have to take it all the way to the demand curve to find the price, right? So that is sort of the key. So yeah, please make sure to practice at home. Then let's talk a little bit about efficiency analysis. Okay, so we talked about this with perfect competition a little bit, these two ideas about allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. So allocative efficiency is when farms are producing a level of quantity where price is equal to marginal cost. Okay, and we know because price is related to the marginal benefit, right? So really this idea of allocative efficiency is that you're producing a level of output where the marginal benefit to society equals the marginal cost for that level of output. Okay, so this idea of P is equal to MC, we saw that is something that is this is something that is achieved in perfect competition. And then there was this other idea of producing a productive efficiency, which is producing a level of output at the lowest possible cost. Okay, so price is equal to the minimum of the average total cost curve, and we saw that in perfect competition, this is what happens in the long run, right? Perfect competition achieve both of these things. Okay, they produce a quantity where price is equal to marginal cost, and they also produce at the minimum of the average total cost, which makes them have a profit of normal profit or economic profit, which is equal to zero. In the long run, they're allocatively efficient. They're also productively efficient in the long run. So, which is why for a society, for consumers, perfect competition is great, but for producers, they hate it because they don't want to be making zero economic profit. They want to be a monopoly, and they want to make positive economic profit and be able to hold on to that in the long run, right? But for a society, from a society's point of view, perfect competition is actually something really great. And this is why we compare everything else to perfect competition, because the other market structures don't achieve these things. Okay, so let's see what monopoly does. So in perfect competition, right, we said that price equals marginal cost. Okay, so let's look at this graph over here. So we're gonna try to understand this by looking at the monopoly graph. Okay, so this is your demand curve, right? For monopoly, this is your marginal revenue. And we know that for the monopolist, right, their quantity QM is over here at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost. Okay, and then their price is over here. Okay, their price is over here, right? I'm taking my QM and then extending it all the way up to my demand. And then when I take it back to the vertical axis, I get this price PM for the monopoly price. So PM is price for monopoly, QM is quantity for monopoly. Okay, and now if you think back to perfect competition, right, we know that for them, right, price is equal to marginal revenue, which is also equal to marginal cost, right? So for perfect competition, for perfectly competitive farms, right, where their demand is also their marginal revenue curve, right? So this was all true in perfect competition. So in PC, P is equal to MR, which is equal to MC, and which is equal to demand. So they're producing over here, right, which is where their marginal cost is equal to their marginal revenue, or is equal to their demand. So they're producing over here, and this is also where their price is, because price is equal to marginal cost in perfect competition. So it's at that level that everything is happening. So hopefully what you notice here is that the monopoly quantity is what? Is it more or less than the perfect competition quantity? So I want you to look at QM and then QC and tell me which is bigger. Hello? Okay. So nobody wants to talk, but you guys want to write down. That's fine, I guess. So yes, so the point here is that, right, that we see monopoly is producing less than perfect competition, right? Because QM is less than QC. And not only that, right, perfect competition charges a lower price of PC, but monopoly charges a higher price PM. So they charge a higher price and they produce a lower quantity, but in that, that results in something called the deadweight loss, right? Remembering back to our welfare analysis, right? With perfect competition, the total welfare is maximized, right? The consumer surplus plus producer surplus, that was equal to total welfare. That is the biggest that it can be with perfect competition, right? But then as soon as you move away from this quantity QC, right, you're gonna have this deadweight loss, right? Because now you're producing less and you're charging a higher price. So because you moved away from this, allocatively efficient, or this quantity where the total welfare is maximized, as soon as you move away from this, you're going to see that you make some deadweight losses. So this is neither going to consumers nor producers. So this is just poof, it's vanishing in thin air. Nobody's being able to capture this area, which results in deadweight loss. So monopoly creates deadweight loss, and total welfare is less than it would be with perfect competition. Okay. Does everybody understand this? Like, can you see it from here, or are there questions? Hello?
No.
No? Max, no understanding?
No.
I understand.
Okay, great. So all I want you to take away from here is that perfect competition, no deadweight loss. Monopoly, deadweight loss, because monopoly produces less than perfect competition and they charge a higher price. So as soon as you move away from this P is equal to marginal cost, right? P is equal to MC, you're gonna be making deadweight losses for society. Okay? Great. So that's all for today. So we have class on Thursday, so hopefully we can finish up this other type of efficiency, and also get started with price discrimination. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.